I'm converting this mercantile spot into a daycare center, which is a different use. The standards for a mercantile retail space is different from educational daycare center care space. And so there has to be analysis done per the building code to see how compatible those two spaces are next to each other.
Daycares tend to be the ones that give most of the average occupant the most trouble. The way the building codes work is that they categorize uses into different occupancy types.
Hello, everyone, and welcome everybody to another episode of the Dream BuildCast. I'm your host, Nick Robinson with Dream Builders. I'm here with co-host Alex Walker from Dream Key Partners, real estate development manager, and also, I would say, architectural designer, soon to be architect. And we're also here with co-host Devon Ellis from Ellis Engineering and Construction Management Services, which has its formal training in civil engineering, structural engineering, building inspection, construction management. Definitely, as always, I appreciate you two being here. As I always say, I am the dumb one in the room because you all have a plethora of experience. And today, Devon is actually kind of driving this topic. He realized that we were speaking about change of uses in one of our previous episodes when we were talking about daycares and we were talking about all these other things, and change of use came up, but we never really unpacked a change of use. So Devon was like, hey, let's do change of use, because that is something that people don't realize the grand scheme of how that impacts their projects and how that could literally impact even spaces outside of your primary function area. Especially if you're in like some type of a strip mall, it could literally impact the entire building. So Devon, you want to kind of give us some background as far as what your thoughts were and introduce that topic?
That is correct. In recent times, we have been having a lot more situations where a prospective occupant of a building wants to use the building for something, for a use that is different from the previous use. Now, whenever you have a situation like that, or maybe let me back up a little bit. The way the building codes work is that they categorize, they as in specifically the International Building Code, they categorize uses into different occupancy types. Now, when you go from one type of occupancy to another type of occupancy, you have what's called a change of use. As an example, if you go from an office use, which is a type B occupancy, or, which is classified as a business occupancy or a B occupancy, and you want to put in a daycare, I keep mentioning daycare because daycares tend to be the ones that give most of the average occupant the most trouble. So you go from an office use to a daycare use, which can either be an E occupancy or an I occupancy, depending on how the exits are set up, etc., etc. So in a case like that, you now have what's called a change of use. Once you have a change of use, the codes now force you into converting an existing space to meet the current code requirements. And these could very well be substantially different from previous. So you mentioned earlier about using a space using an existing space in a strip mall. And let's say the strip mall is constructed from a certain kind of material. Now, depending on the material that the building is constructed from, the code allows a maximum size, a maximum area. It also allows maximum height. But I'm going to focus on the area piece because that's typically the bigger issue. You now are required to make this entire strip mall, for example, could very well be impacted by your just wanting to make a change of use in one space in the
Can we pause there for 1 second? So I just want to make sure that everybody's kind of picking up exactly what a change of use is, because we've kind of thrown a lot at them really quickly. So Alex, can you more like give because you're a plan reviewer, so you saw this every single day with people coming in and saying, hey, I want to do this space, right? And ultimately, that's not what it was used for historically, like previously, right? So I am moving, like you're saying, Devon, there's daycares, right? Well, this used to be a business, like a retail shop, right? Or some type of mercantile function. Can you give try to give a clear, concise, like how did you explain that to the average person that was coming in for plan review that they now needed a change of use?
Oh, sure. So the building code is broken up into different classifications. So you have residential use, you have business use, you have mercantile use, you have high occupancy use or gathering space, assembly use, you could say that would be. So the building code is broken down into these different areas. And so if you want to change the use from, say, an assembly space to a business space, you have to do some sort of analysis, because each one of those uses has a particular standard of how things should be designed and how many people and how safe that use is in a particular building type. And so when we say change of use analysis, which essentially means we are looking at one use, say an assembly, and its criteria for being built versus, say, a residential use. And so we compare the two. We're saying, I'm going to change this assembly use to a residential use. So now I have to decide and do an analysis of what are all the safety regulations that need to be input into this new use of residential versus the assembly. And so oftentimes people would come in or in a retail spot or whatever it may be and say, I'm converting this mercantile spot into a daycare center, which is a different use. It's a different educational use. And so the standards for a mercantile retail space is different from a educational daycare center care space. And so there has to be analysis done per the building code to see how compatible those two spaces are next to each other or even within that same space. And there are safety standards associated with those things. So when change of use occurs, that's what we're talking about.
Absolutely. So I guess from an architect standpoint, I'm looking at this as you wouldn't design a home exactly the way you design a store, right? And you wouldn't design a school the same way you design a ballroom, right? So just like I need to literally rearrange the spaces differently because they're going to be used for different things, the code is actually saying, hey, I have a standard set of rules for each of these uses that are necessary in order to protect the health, safety, and welfare. And Devon, I'm going to use your words that you used previously of the public, right? Not the occupant, the public, right? So, okay, just waiting to make sure, because like there's so many times people come to me and they go, why in the world I need a change of use? Can't they grandfather me in? There's no grandfather that's going to help you when you're trying to put 75 people through a door that can only fit 50, or 25. Like if you literally don't have enough exits in order for people to get out of the building safely in case of an emergency per code, it just doesn't make sense to, think that same space is going to be able to be used as a different space without any modifications. I mean, even when it comes to bathrooms, right? The number of bathrooms required for, like I was actually talking to a gentleman yesterday, he's opening a adult family home, and, that's 15, people per lavatory per water closet. So per toilet, per sink, you need one sink, one toilet for every 15 people. That quickly helped him realize that he was not going to do 50 occupants. He was going to do 45 because that extra 5 people would have triggered a whole nother toilet, So I think all those things kind of play into it, right? When we're talking about a change of use, because it's literally using a space for something different than what it was used prior. But if you obviously come into a business occupancy, there is no change of use. So that's the way I kind of always explain it on my side. Go ahead, Devon.
Yeah, and I was just even saying that even within that, recognize that the big thing here is actually the classification. So it meaning the use classification, because you could be using the space for an office previously, and then now want to use it for martial arts practicing. And that might not necessarily trigger a change of use because both uses are classified as B occupancies or business occupancies. So all of that comes into play.
100%. So what else do you all feel like just the general public should keep in mind when it comes down to like triggering a change of use? I mean, that's pretty much the biggest thing, right? You're literally just changing the use of the space, correct?
Right. In essence, that's what it is. I think the bigger part of this whole thing are the consequences of a change of use. I mean,
gloom and doom.
I use consequence there deliberately because a change of use in a number of instances have some serious impacts on the overall project costs. You, for example, could have situations, and we mentioned strip mall previously, where you have a non-conforming strip mall, which means that the mall would not meet today's code, but was grandfathered in because the historical use had continued to today. Now, once you make a change, then it triggers a requirement to bring the space up to today's standard. So you could, for example, have a building, a strip mall, in which one of the spaces is larger than allowed by today's code, but was allowed previously. And you now want this to use the space, let's say, for a daycare again. I like talking about daycare because, again, it just pops up all the time.
Absolutely. And I think some of the views on our previous videos indicate that people are definitely very much so interested in learning about daycare. So now let's drive that train.
So you could have a space, depending on the building type of construction, that's limited to an area of, say, 12,000 square feet.
And that's by code, right? When you say limited
to
an area.
Right. That's an example.
Okay.
And then you want to, the space is actually maybe 14,000 square feet, but the current code is limited to 12,000 square feet. Now, you try to occupy the space for change the use, means now that you are in violation of today's code. So you now have to either have this building sprinklered, have the space sprinklered. I say space, but Alex, you help me out here. But my recollection, when you have a building where the compartment, where the different spaces are contiguous, if you sprinkler one space, you kind of have to sprinkler the entire building, correct?
I would say it depends. But, most likely that's what you would do, given that the expense of doing one space is most likely you would continue that throughout the entire building. Now, you have to remember the whole thing is about safety and the maximum safety for whatever use and the individuals who would be using that space. There has to be an understanding that, within the building code, you have provisions for how to make buildings safe. And when we talk about financial consequences, people have to decide, oh, well, I have a certain size space. Per the building code, it can be a certain size without having to jump up to that next safety requirements and if you want to continue to use that space. And so you have to consider what the occupant load is, meaning how many people are going to be in that space and what are they using that space for. So the more people in a space means the higher the safety code is going to be, requiring split sprinklers. What are you building the building materials out of to construct that space? All those factor into how the space is going to be designed and to how many people can be in that space. And so the type of building construction materials limits how many people can be in a space or what the safety requirements will be. Those are things to keep in mind.
Okay. I know you said, hey, it makes sense to do it if you have to do one space. So let's say I do trigger something, right? Are you saying that now my space would now be required to be fire sprinkler and I wouldn't necessarily have to do the other spaces? Or are you saying that, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, it makes sense to, but what's the bare minimum requirement in an instance like that?
My recollection is that I thought NFPA 72 has specifications that guide how the actual sprinklering system, that it guides the operation and installation requirements of the system. And I think that's Alex alluded to this, that basically you have options. Actually, I mentioned sprinklering as one of the options, but one of the other options is compartmentalization. So you could literally make your space a separate building within this building.
How would you
by
do that?
compartmental using firewalls.
Okay. And when you say firewalls, that's not fire separation, right? That's different than when we say...
Right. So these are specially constructed walls that in a specified way separate the spaces.
Okay. And I think we unpacked this in a previous episode, but this is a structurally independent fire wall.
That is typically the requirement for it to be used for this compartmentalization feature. That's right, Alex?
Well, yeah, then I guess the question becomes, well, what signifies that? It needs its own foundation. It needs to go up a certain way. It needs to be a self-supporting structure, perhaps goes beyond the roof line. So there's very specific things that go into that. Very technical, that just have to be understood and known about what those cost implications would be.
Right. And then that's not to be confused of, I just want to mention this really quickly, because a lot of times with the change of use, people go, oh, well, I need a fire wall. They say that word, but you need a fire separation. Typically, because what we're talking about right now is saying, no, you're about to trigger a larger thing. This isn't just separating yourself from the adjacent tenant, because the separating yourself from extra tenant is, then you can remember it just like this. It's a separation, right? It's a fire separation.
That's right.
A wall is saying, no, I need an actual wall that's almost like I'm a separate building. And that's only triggered when you're trying to get away from, like you said, you're over that maximum allowable square footage or whatever. But if you're not triggering those big things, it's just about being able to have a fire separation between you and the adjacent tenant so that you guys don't endanger each other. I've had an assembly space next to a Mercantile, a liquor store, which is like obviously their worst case scenario is like you have a bunch of flammable material next to a bunch of people partying, so that's like a 2-hour firewall situation, or so I say fire separation. We can't even use the term. So do you have some other thoughts, Devon?
Yeah, I think I wanted to just very quickly clarify why I mentioned the sprinklering piece and the compartmentalization strategy. If you put sprinklers in a building, you are allowed, assuming the sprinkler is installed per the standards. And I think the standards that govern sprinklers is one of the NFPA 72, I think, is the one that governs sprinklers. But assume it's installed per those standards, then you can have an unlimited building area. So that's why I brought the sprinkler in it, because if the building was previously sprinklered, then it's a non-issue, because sprinkler allows one to use a building of any size.
Gotcha.
Most of the issues that we see where these area limitations are triggered, or where these area limitation problems are triggered, is in buildings where that weren't previously sprinklered.
Okay.
So I just wanted to clarify that.
No, I think that's important, because if you're going to make an investment and actually fire sprinkler your building and the cost behind that, right? At least what you're saying is now, I mean, and I think we should also bring this up, in addition to having unlimited area, now those fire separations can now be reduced a lot of times. So if it used to be a 1 hour fire separation requirement, now you only have to do 2 hours. Now you only have to do a 1 hour a lot of times, which if you look at the actual construction of your standard 1 versus 2 hour wall, I mean, I know over at, the old Midtown, right now, a lot of those buildings are constructed already with 1 hour fire separations and their fire sprinklers and things like that. So when tenants are moving in and they're trying to do their this versus that, those change of uses are not really triggering major, construction. So if you're building a new building, I think a lot of new buildings are just required to have fire sprinklers now, correct?
They tend to put them in.
Okay.
It promotes long-term viability when you put in fire sprinkler system, and it's kind of built into the cost of what developers or owners are doing for retail spaces. It's kind of like an automatic thing that people just do nowadays. I think the notion and the codes and the general understanding is that if you put in a fire sprinkler, it's easier to get your plans approved by the municipality just because people see it. It's kind of automatically sign off on it because it promotes safety.
I got you.
As well as insurance rates go down and all those sort of things.
All right.
And that is a huge factor.
What are some other things on the non-building architecture side? So you said insurance rates. Is there other things that we can see as benefits or know as benefits to that?
Well, one immediate one is the flexibility.
What type of flexibility are you talking about?
Well, so many times you're developing a building, some of the spaces are developed as white box, which means basically it's just there. You don't know the exact use that might be in that space in the future. So if you have the building sprinklered, then you don't worry too much about all of the specific requirements, because the sprinklering kind of neutralizes some of the requirements, especially as it pertains to area. So it definitely improves your flexibility.
Okay, nope, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I feel like, is there anything on the general side that we want to point out when it comes to change of uses? Because I feel like we're at this point where we should almost, I feel like we need to actually look at a real world application in order for people to truly understand how this could actually, implicate and, how this could actually basically impact their project.
Right. I mean, one of the situations you mentioned previously was a strip mall. There is one example that I have been asked about, and that involves prospective occupant wanting to use a space within a strip mall for a daycare. As it turns out, this strip mall has some wood construction, but I think the exterior walls are masonry, so we're probably talking about a type 3B construction.
Okay.
So the area is then was limited. The maximum area, maximum building size, building area, in that case was limited to 12,000 square feet.
Okay.
But the actual space that they want to convert to this daycare use is about 14,000 square feet.
2,000 square feet over. Gotcha.
That is correct. So what that means now, and just to provide the proper perspective, this is a strip mall, so you have occupants adjacent to this space. This building is unsprinkled.
Okay.
So that 14,000 square foot that I mentioned was in the compartment that she wants to use, which means that she has separation between firewall, between the space that you want to use and the neighbors. But though these walls are constructed such that her space is 14,000 square feet, just so clarification.
Let me just ask this because you use the term firewall. So she has a firewall between them or fire separation between her and
these are firewall because the building was constructed unsprinkled and was built to code at the time when it was built.
Okay, so these walls so the roof is not continuous over the top of things.
That is correct. Okay. Yeah, you have carpets at these walls. That's correct.
So that's another, just in case people are wondering, like, oh, how do I know if this is a firewall versus a fire separation? If that wall a lot of times comes up to the underside of the roof and stops, a lot of times it's a fire separation, right? But then if you see, like, let's say you look at Google Maps, right? You can literally see the wall coming up through the roof. A lot of times that is a firewall, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So I think we should pause right there. This could be like a part one of the discussion, and we'll go into part two next time where we really unpack exactly what the implications of this case study is. So Alex and Devon, I appreciate your time as always, and looking forward to unpacking this one next time with you.
All right.
All right. See you.